Brilliant. Well, good morning, everyone, and a big welcome to East End Church. And by the way, Nick, what an amazing job. But if you don't mind, don't call us. We'll call you. So anyway, let's have a show of hands if any of you have bought a diary at the start of this year and started filling it out. Or maybe you started planning your life on one of these. I don't know, maybe, that's what you did. And now keep your hands up if actually pretty much all of your plans have gone tits up since Corona has all started. Well, let me just tell you a little bit about what happened for me on the 13th of March this year. It was a Friday. I had plans, pretty boring plans to start with, but here were my plans. Get up early, work from home for that whole day, and at the end of the day I was going to go out into the garden and do a little bit of DIY. I was making shelves. By the way, my wife has put me on a shelf making ban because I make shelves all over the place, and so she's put me on a bit of a ban there. Anyway, at 5 o'clock, I was going to head out to a customer's house to go and price up a job. And then later on that evening, I was going to crack open a bottle of wine and romance my wife because Friday is date night for us. Cue the Barry White music. But however, I got only through half of those very grand plans of mine, and out of nowhere, this fine specimen of health and well-being suddenly started getting pains. I thought it must have been too much pizza the night before, or maybe the fact I hadn't been wearing any PPE when I was sanding my shelves. But all of a sudden, I started feeling sick. I couldn't breathe properly. I started getting pins and needles all up my arm and up into my jaw, and I started spazzing out in front of the kids. And this wasn't good, so they called the ambulance. And it turns out I was just having a massive heart attack. That's all. No warning signs, no nothing. Within about half an hour, I was rushed down to Barts Hospital where I was on the operating table. And that night, I reached heaven, but not as planned. It was all about the morphine. That's what it was. And it was a wake-up call for me because with all of my planning in my diary, etc., there's some sobering questions for me and for us here this morning. And that is, who is actually in charge? So who is in charge of me? Who is in charge of you? And actually, who is in charge during Corona time? And once we know this, what difference does it make for us? And for some of you here this morning, you might be familiar with the 19th century poet, William Ernest Henley. He wrote a poem called Invictus. To be honest, poetry really ain't my thing. Actually, it does my head in. But I'm sure you'll be familiar with this one. It's a famous quote. He said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." Yeah, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And many people, they've lived by this quote over the years, and it can sound great, but is it actually true? Who is actually in charge? So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the book of James in the Bible in a second. By the way, James, he was the younger brother of Jesus, and he led a church over in Jerusalem. And this is what he said, and the words are going to come up on the screen in a sec. But we're just going to read a short passage from James chapter 4, verse 13 to 17. So the words will appear on your screen now. It says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow, we're going to go to such and such a place, a city or a town, and we're going to trade and we're going to make a profit there. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little time and then you vanish. Instead, what you ought to say is, if the Lord wills, we will live and we will do this or we'll do that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." So for background, James was writing to people from a Jewish background who had fairly recently become Christians, and they'd been scattered all around foreign towns and lands that they weren't familiar with. And this was all because of persecution that they'd received. And at the start of the book of James, actually James acknowledges this fact, because he says, you will face trials of many kinds. He acknowledges that because all of them, pretty much all of them, they'd lost homes and possession and family members and normal means of earning a living and all of those things. And so they were just starting to learn to find their feet through times of fear and confusion and loneliness and anger and all the rest of it. And James basically wanted to encourage them that in the face of all this hardship and struggle, he wanted to try and strengthen them for faithful Christian living, so that they didn't get into this trap of living like all of the rest of the people did all around them in that culture that was there. And these messages that James preached, that we've been speaking about in the last few weeks, actually, they are true for us today. You know, because through Corona, actually, it throws up all kinds of questions for all of us, and uncertainties and fears and hardships. You know, if I'm on furlough, if I've lost my job, how am I going to pay the wages? How am I going to pay for rent and get food on the table and so on? So these are challenges that we never dreamt of a year ago. We weren't able to plan for. And James was challenging them in the face of all their struggles to recognize that God is in charge and to seek his wisdom to try and work out their problems. And it's the same for us here this morning. So it turns out that many of these Jewish Christians, they had skills that allowed them to earn some decent P. You know, some of them were wealthy merchant traders with the ability to move around from one city to another. But James knew that with financial prosperity, that could often lead to a self-reliance and not a reliance on God. And so within our own society, even now, we're encouraged to go after our own dreams and pursue our own goals. And you know, how many things are you going to achieve before you hit the age of X, whatever that is? And this idea of managing our own destiny and our own fate, it could be quite godless, in fact. And the thing is, it's not a sin to dream or to set goals or to plan. You know, in fact, in the book of Proverbs, which is in the Bible, it talks a lot about planning. It talks a lot about planning in the Bible, to seek good counsel and have a good plan in place. And after all, you're all here this morning because you're on Zoom, because you set your mental watches and you joined us at 10:25 on the dot, didn't you? Yeah? Planning is good. And actually, the Bible encourages us to think about our future and to think about heaven, where we will go if we put our trust and our faith in Jesus. But to be clear, God ain't doing a Boris on us, you know, go to work, but definitely don't go to work, you know, have fun, but definitely don't have any fun, plan, but don't plan at all. You know, the problem is when our plans are very great plans, they don't include God. Yeah, that's where the problem lies. See, pride, it seeks to steal a portion of God's glory for ourselves by trying to become the master of our own fate and our own destiny. And the people that James was talking to here, they were confident, they were possibly arrogant, who thought they were in control of their own future, their own destinies, and it was a challenge for them, and it is also a challenge for us. And so there's a question here for us this morning, you know, do you make your plans and then ask God to come along and bless them once you're done? Yeah, do you make your plans already and then ask God to come and bless them? And I find it actually is a good principle, mentally even, to write your plans in pencil, because then it allows God to come and rub it out and put his plans there in place. So write them in pencil and allow him to come and rub them out. And throughout the book of James, you realize that James doesn't really have a filter. You know, I mean, he was the brother of Jesus after all, and Jesus could be quite blunt in the things that he said, but with a heart of love for those that he was speaking to. And James doesn't pull any punches. He was basically saying, you know, come on, you know, really, you having a laugh? You know, what is your life? You are a mist that is here and it's gone tomorrow, just like that. Basically, you're talking about your holiday plans and your marriage plans and your, what job you're going to have next and stuff. Are you even going to be alive tomorrow morning, mate? That's basically what he's saying to them. James isn't saying here today, gone tomorrow. He's basically saying here today, possibly even gone today, which is in complete contrast to God, who is eternal and he is everlasting. So who is actually in charge? In Jesus's short 3 years of ministry, his obedience to his Father had the hugest impact on the whole of humanity. Jesus swung a hammer, honing his trade as a chippy for probably 15, 16 years or so. But when God wanted him to put his hammer down, Jesus humbly submitted himself to his Father's authority, ended up obediently going to the cross because he knew who is in charge and who knew best ultimately. Jesus had every opportunity to be able to do his own thing, to boost his own career and, revel in the miracles that he had and earn a bit of money. But his obedience to the Father means life for us ultimately, because he triumphed over the cross and over sin and over death. I just want to, this morning, keep it quite short and tell you just a few personal stories that demonstrate that God is in charge, and also mine and my wife's journey of learning to trust in the wisdom of God when we don't see what the end goal is. And just to help you understand, actually, it's not always easy. Quite often it's not easy, actually, but it is worth it. That's the thing. So I'm just going to tell you a few stories. Back when I was 22, we got married, and to be honest, that was a challenge in itself, in that, the thoughts that were going around in my head at the time was that I was worried. I was thinking, how am I going to be able to provide for myself and my wife, jobs and all the rest? But I sought the counsel of good, godly guys that I trusted, and I prayed, and I really trusted in God there. And then we ended up getting married in 1998, and that was great. We were living down in Brighton for a little while down there, and I was working in a garage as a paint sprayer there, and it was a real dog-eat-dog world. Some of the guys could be quite racist sometimes. My boss was nasty, and but just kept on praying. Anyway, came back from our honeymoon after a couple of weeks, and I was walking to work, and on my way to work, very first day back, I was just praying to God, and I was saying, God, I feel like I'm in a rock and a hard place, between a rock and a hard place. I don't know what to do in terms of leaving this job. I really want to leave it. You're going to have to, show me what to do here, because I really, where do I go? What do I do next? And anyway, I walked into work, and my boss called me into his office, and he said, I want to have a word with you. We've got some bad news. I was like, well, what is it? He said, basically, we're shutting down the whole business and you've lost your job. You're going to be made redundant. I just started laughing. And he said, no, I'm serious. And I was like, yeah, I'm serious as well. I just thought, God, you've forced my hand. You've answered me even before I've had a proper chance to think about what I was praying about. But God bless me there. And he kind of forced my hand. And the next thing was, I was working on building sites for a little while. And then he blessed me to be able to start working for the government. And this was a brand new job, which I'd never even learned to use a keyboard properly before, never used a computer. I said these were brand new skills that I was learning on the job there. And so we lived down in Brighton for a few years. And after a couple of years of being there, and just always seeking God, what's next? Me and my wife just started getting itchy feet as to where we were going to live next. We didn't feel that God wanted us to remain and raise a family and everything there in Brighton. And so we were just praying and asking for his wisdom and so on, and seeking the counsel of other godly men and women that we trusted to help us through that process. And we just started testing the water by visiting other areas and so on. And what we found is the more that we trusted in God, the more God started to open doors for us. And this wasn't instantly. This wasn't just like that. Many months this took, but we just had to learn to trust in God. But we felt over a period of time that actually God was calling us to live in London and to help start a church plant here in the East End of London. And so we started planning for all of that. And to be honest, we had no job to come to. We had no property. We had no savings. We had nothing really. And it could have been so easy for us just to wallow and start worrying about what happens next because we had no answers there. But we kept looking to God. Now, on the Friday when we were about to leave, just before the weekend when we were leaving London, it was 4:30 in the afternoon, just about to head down the pub with guys from work, guys and girls, and just celebrate, last day and so on. I got a phone call from an ex-colleague of mine who had moved up to Greenwich, and she spoke to her boss, and the boss said she wanted to interview us for a job when we returned. So we moved up over the weekend, and I got interviewed on a Tuesday by this boss who basically told me I was right for the job. Do I want to start right here, right now? So that was great. It's almost like the 11th hour of being down there in Brighton, not knowing what's next. And then suddenly God just blesses us and shows us the way. We ended up moving into a flat on the Roman, and even our deposit, which was double what we were paying down in Brighton for a flat, that got paid for us. So it was a blessing. I got a pay increase almost instantly, and God just started to bless us one thing after the other. And that was 20 years ago now, 20 years ago, 2 months ago now. And God has continued to bless and direct us throughout our lives. But at the beginning of the journey, of the whole journey, it could look pretty bleak, to be honest, because we didn't have any answers. We didn't know what the end goal was. But ultimately, we knew that God was in charge, that God is in charge. And Jesus, he has all of the answers, no matter what. And another, I could tell you many stories, but here's more recent ones. But here's another one from a few years ago now. For the first time, my wife and I, we thought we were in debt for a few things, which we needed to clear some debts and get a few things that we needed. And for the first time, we thought, I wonder if it's right to get a loan out. We've never had a loan in our lives other than a mortgage. But we thought, is this the right thing to do? And so we just put it to God. We were praying, God, is this the right thing that you want us to do? Get a loan out and so on. So we kept on asking him. We didn't have any clear answers, in all honesty, but we just kept on pushing with God and leaving with God and trusting in him and asking him that if this isn't right, that you would put a blockage in our path from the very outset. We wouldn't go on any further because we do not want to do anything if it isn't your will. And anyway, I applied for a loan and it got approved. And the night before the money got put in the bank, the bank manager, whoever it is, they gave us a call and just started going through some routine questions there. And through one of these routine questions, there was a technicality, and she basically said, because of the type of mortgage that you guys have got, we can't give you this loan. Now, this was the very night before the money was meant to come in. We planned everything over weeks. And so what we were going to get, where the money was going to go to, where it was going to be channeled, it was going to be a big blessing for us. And at that very moment, she said, we couldn't get that money into our bank the next. I was livid. I was really cross. I wanted to speak to the manager, and none of this was going to happen. Anyway, next morning, I was walking to work. And on my way to work, I was just praying and I was planning in my head. And I'm telling you, I know how to complain. If I want to complain about something, you don't want to have beef with me because I could properly complain about something, right? And so anyway, I was walking to work and I was praying to God, and I was mentally planning kind of what I was going to say and how I was going to, I was going to be writing to the manager, I was going to be writing to the Prime Minister, everyone was going to know about this. I was cross. And this was my channel of thinking. And it was almost like God just suddenly, how like a car can just cut you up. You're driving this way, it just cuts you up. It felt like God just cut me up. And it was almost to the effect of, leave it out, son. And it was kind of words to that kind of effect. It was like, leave it and trust in me. You've asked me for wisdom at the very start of this, and I just want you to leave it now. Just leave it. That is it. And I knew that actually, as I trusted in God there, I felt a real sense of calm and release. And don't get me wrong, still didn't have the flipping money, but I knew that I needed to trust in God. Anyhow, 6 months later passed, and an aunt of Esther's, lovely old lady, the kind that every Christmas and Easter would forget your name and not fully convinced that I'm part of the family, and ask me politically incorrect questions about my foreignness and things like that, and would hide her handbag every time she went off to the toilet. Anyway, she died, and she left us, shall we say, the fattest check ever. Chitting, it met all our needs and more, and saved us from being locked in for the next 5 years plus of having to pay masses of interest if we had of taken out that loan. It just blessed us instantly. And, it was a long time. It was a good 6 months or so since we'd applied for that loan and got rejected or so. But it was an instant reminder for us that God knows best, and he loves us, and he loves to bless us, and he knows our future even when we don't. And basically, he's got a reason for all things. We sometimes don't understand. Often we don't understand why things happen, but ultimately he does. And don't get me wrong, there are things that we've been praying about for many, many years now as a couple, and asking God for wisdom, but we haven't had any answers on. But ultimately, we know that God is in charge. And I could be a bit of a Mr. Know-it-all and try and sort out those problems myself, and through hook or by crook. But ultimately, I know how foolish that would be. To conclude, there's a saying out in the Middle East that's commonly used, and it's inshallah. Inshallah. And it means if it is the will of God. If it is the will of God. And Jesus lived, and he ended up dying by this. For he said, "For I've come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me." Yeah. For I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me. And this isn't simply something that we spout off for everything we do. I'm going here, inshallah. I'm getting this job, inshallah. No, it's an attitude of the heart that affects all of our being and all of our behavior. It's a matter of who God is to you, and do you believe and do you trust in him? Is he just good? Or, sorry, is he just in charge, or is he also good? And if we really do believe and embrace his goodness, it's me saying that I'm okay with your will, Lord. I submit to it, because ultimately you know best. You know it all. And so I'm going to learn to trust in you. And the difference that makes is that attitude of the heart, it brings peace to us, knowing that God wants the best for us always. So I'm going to finish there, and I'm going to hand back to Steve. So over to you, Steve.